and welcome back to the AFL High Performance Podcast. My name is Jack McLean. I'm your host, and today I'm lucky enough to have James Grierson as our guest. And he is the rehab physiotherapist at the Fremantle Dockers. And our key topic for today's chat will be breaking the cycle of preventing soft tissue injury recurrences. So really looking forward to this chat. It's actually the first time we've discussed this topic on the podcast. So thanks, James, for picking it, mate, and thank you for your time for jumping on the podcast, mate. Looking forward to our chat.
Excited to be here, and long time listener, mate. So happy to have a chat, and hopefully, there's a lot of good guests on your program, so hopefully can add some value to your listeners.
No, absolutely, no doubt you will, mate. And great to meet the listener. Thank you again for jumping on. For those that aren't aware of your background, mate, do you mind providing a bit of a context on, I guess, how it all started for you, your passion for pro sport, academic side, and then different roles you've had in pro sport as well?
Yeah, so I guess it's the sort of journey, I guess, for someone in high school that's enjoying sport and science and kind of thinking about what sort of area you want to get into, and sort of pulled my finger out in year 12 and probably just got into the grades to get into the Bachelor of Physiotherapy here in Perth at Notre Dame. And then, always, I guess, broad spectrum physiotherapy degree, you cover a lot of bases there, always kind of had the inkling to try and get towards, sport. So, ended up traveling the world a little bit, working overseas in New York City initially in my career, which was a really fortunate opportunity. And then sort of through that kind of accelerated the process of, look, I really want to get my master's in sports physiotherapy. So, relocated back to Perth to do my postgrad sports physio masters, and that was back in 2014. So, that once you kind of, I guess, coming from the physio side of things, I know there's sort of a broad spectrum of professionals in your listeners, but that's definitely a minimum requirement these days to get into any kind of semi-professional organisation even. So it opened a lot of opportunities in terms of internships and exposure to senior staff, and then you kind of, I guess, from there along the pathway, along some different opportunities and sort of cutting your teeth in different environments before a full-time opportunity pops up.
And Fremantle Dockers, mate, what led to that sort of opportunity? What was your first full-time role there?
Yeah, so I guess working backwards a little bit there. I think in 2014, as part of my university studies, I had a placement at the WACA. And so, really fortunate to work amongst a bunch of staff there looking after their academy programs. And that led to a role, under 17s, under 19s, national or state squads working in the national sort of frameworks, which, that's really, I think, has always had a big influence on me in terms of the, in cricket in particular, in terms of the, I guess you could say, load prescription and sort of forecasting, loading and those kind of things. That was kind of an early real insight into it, clearly with your fast bowler cohort that I was sort of involved in there in terms of injury prevention. So I guess with that, it was, a couple of years there whilst working in private practice at a clinic here in Perth with some sort of, I guess you'd say, senior football staff. And then I guess always the inkling to try and find a way into footy, that always being a bit of a passion of mine and playing myself at a very amateur level, but enjoying it anyway. And I guess, in Perth where, we've got the state league, we've got the waffle, and sort of, I think back at that time, there wasn't a lot of, I guess, different clubs were different, but there wasn't a lot of, I guess, focus on the high performance environment as much. So sort of found the opportunity to go over to Melbourne to work at the Western Bulldogs with Footscray, the VFL side, which for me was a big sort of, I guess, step moving over, I guess, for a semi-professional role. At the time, really, I guess it's a hard one to kind of to look at, considering the sort of pays and those kind of things. But for me, that was just an amazing opportunity to be in an aligned club, and effectively kind of did a few hours at a clinic over in Melbourne, and this was back in 2017. And but just saturated myself in the club as much as possible and took it as almost as an internship again, to be able to work alongside things. And that program was very heavily aligned, the VFL and AFL, and so it was an amazing opportunity for me, and certainly planned to stay there for a while. And from there, found out me and my wife found out we were having a baby, so it was a pretty quick journey back to Perth to get some support around us. So that was only a year at the Bulldogs, but certainly a very, very rewarding year. And from there, found an opportunity at East Perth Football Club, which was a club I was sort of local to back in the day, and spent 3 years there, and in that time set up a private clinic as well to be aligned to that football club, and still something I'm very proud of, sort of being a founder and co-founder of WA Sports Med Physiotherapy, which is I think something I'm very proud of in my career as well, but always kind of trying to work towards the full-time sport opportunity, which through the chaos, I guess, of 2020 and COVID years and all those kind of things, was probably just fortunate to be experienced enough to be able to reach out to an opportunity. And so since late 2020, I've been at the Fremantle Dockers now, and probably as a rehabilitation manager role now for 4 seasons. A bit of a journey to get there, as everyone will sort of attest to, but very rewarding kind of learning and education along the way that's kind of helped shape where I've got to, and still more to go, definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. You mentioned the I guess getting yourself into a program that was aligned with an AFL club. Was how did you find out about that role with the Doggies? Was it advertised publicly? Did you find out through your network? Talk us through, I guess, for the listeners that are looking to get themselves in at the highest level that they possibly can and gain some experience.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, clearly every October there's a bit of a there's a lot of movement sort of going on, and I was aware enough of that's when the opportunities, or the football departments, all the relative leagues are sort of setting up. So I was pretty kind of I guess keen in that October to really find something, and it was actually quite late in the piece that I think it was advertised on their website somehow. It might have been shared somehow, but I'm pretty sure I remember applying directly through the Western Bulldogs website. So that was which is a bit atypical, I think, these days. But I probably, I guess there was a somewhat of a connection there with someone who at least knew the same people that I knew, which, if you take sort of a backward step on that was me placing myself at a reputable physiotherapy clinic here that was alongside senior football staff, which, that's ended up, I guess, having some sort of a connection there, which probably meant, again, for a VFL role in Melbourne, the fact that I even kind of entertain a candidate from Perth, you probably had to, I guess, stand out a little bit there, and that was probably through the connections. So that was kind of that process, and from there it was kind of a little bit of like, they were like, you're really going to come across, and can you come soon? So I think I was there, mid-November, really sort of, like I said, stunk into that year big time.
And then when you moved to East Perth, they had similar processes set up, or did the learnings from being an aligned club, sort of were able to, bring those processes and systems into East Perth?
Yeah, so I mean, East Perth were aligned to the West Coast Eagles at that time. Anyone who's sort of in Perth knows that those sort of alignments have always been a bit frosty, you could say, because they're East Perth's been around for 130 years. It's a very proud sort of, I guess, long-term football club, and the Eagles had a fair sort of influence on them through some different sort of mechanics and those kind of things, which, that's how it sort of had to be then. But it was very different in that sense that, you're really a sole practitioner. I had a really great S&C coach alongside me who'd been there for a few years, and he, from a performance side of things, ran a really, really good ship, and he's gone on to sort of further football pathways as well, which is fantastic. But from a medical perspective, it was probably more basic and very much on the footy department really, they don't have their eyes on medical performance and medical systems. It's almost like first aid management in some ways. So there was a bit of kind of effort to try and drive a bit more professionalism in the case. But for the stage of my career and where I was at, trying to sort of sink into those kind of things was appropriate, and um, that's a great challenge in itself that I learned a lot from, is trying to, I guess, purely from a medical side of things, improve the services that were provided overall. So yeah, it was quite different, I would say, and it sort of grew along the way. And I think these days, the state leagues are thriving in terms of the talent that are in those pathways now. Probably just reflecting on it, back then it was quite different.
Mm-hmm. And strong influences, mate, mentors, if you like, that help shape your philosophy today.
Yeah, so there's heaps, and so like I said, list off some different names, all sort of different pieces and different bits of wisdom. But the physio Luke Bongiorno, who's based in New York City, who really, I guess, took a punt on me with an opportunity to work overseas there, and he's got a very strong, I guess, one body mind kind of type connection vibe, which sort of early in my career has always had a bit of an influence on me. And then from there, like sort of coming back and doing my masters, being at the WACA, Nick Jones was the head of physiotherapy or sports medicine services back then, and he's now head of Cricket Australia, and still keep in touch with Nick. He's been a fantastic help for me in terms of just driving a really high standard. The clinic I was working at was alongside Chris Perkin, who's one of the Eagles physios, and he's got a balance of clinical work and football work, which is something that always was something I always kind of admired about him. His sort of juggling act. My business partner at the clinic is Leon Vogels, he used to work at the Brisbane Lions, and he's one of the Australian Olympic physios, and he's got a cert, and cycling Australia and those kind of things. He's got a very technical brain working in endurance sports, so I lean on him a lot, and still have a chat with him every day. And then there's the physio cohort that have been at the Western Bulldogs and Freo. So Sarah Hassani, who I don't think's sort of working as much in sport anymore, she was drove a really high standard with me in my time with the Bulldogs, and Chris Bell, senior physio there, was also just so generous with his time and offering learnings for me in that. And then there's the physio cohort over here in Perth, who Jeff Boyle I've always kept in touch with. Greg Mullings was a great mentor of mine as well, sort of when I was trying to get into the sort of football environment, and still to this day working alongside Marshall Stockton, who's our senior physio at Freo. The wisdom that he's got over many years of service, and his manner of caring for our athletes is something that I'll always try and sort of look up to and admire. So.
And what about highlights, mate, of your career that sort of spring front of mind you've had to experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I think anything in here, you'd love to say there's a premiership along the way. We haven't, unfortunately, I haven't had that yet. Hopefully, there's something on the horizon. But no doubt, seeing the long-term rehab athletes return to play in the role that you're in is without a doubt the most gratifying experience and fulfilling sort of sense of achievement that you have. And you have to celebrate those kind of occasions, because, as we'll talk about as we sort of get into the topic further, the setbacks are, I personally feel them. I know anyone who works closely with athletes will really feel them too. So, there's a couple of key examples of recurrent soft tissue injuries that have taken me to areas in terms of my practice and the way I would, I guess, view things and attack things that have been a whole new lesson for me, and seeing those sort of, I guess, that effort play out into a hopefully predominantly successful outcome, then that's clearly the big thing. But I mean, I'm quite proud of sort of where I've got to in terms of running a business and also working in football. That's something that I do hold very, very proud. The business is growing, and we've got some great connections and partnerships and an amazing staff group. So I guess that's an achievement in myself that I kind of will reflect on pretty regularly. But hopefully, if we chat again, I can say there's a flag in there that I've been a closer part of.
Fantastic. And what about challenges, mate? Like you mentioned, obviously in rehab there, and in any role really in high performance sport, we're living on the edge, and there's pressure that comes with that. What have been some of the more significant challenges you've faced, and I guess, how did you learn, or how did you grow from facing those challenges?
Yeah, so I think it's like I've already mentioned, the setbacks are definitely the thing that they're the biggest challenge I think in our environment. As um, you know you know in the role that I'm in now as rehabilitation manager, you're very accountable, very specifically accountable to outcomes when it comes to the rehab athletes. So um, there's not many roles, I would say, within the AFL system where it's a very, very clear line of accountability. Um, Everything is always shared across the department, and in my case, 100% every decision and all the ins and outs of rehab are always shared, and I never feel the burden of the team sort of isolating me in any way. But inevitably, that is my line of contact, is to speak to the rehab athletes every day and give them an appropriate program and prepare them to play. So if we have a setback along the way, there's something that I've missed personally, and as a team we've missed. So without a doubt, they're the biggest challenges, but again, with those challenges comes reflection and comes hopefully a refining of something and growth out of it. And that's certainly what I've found with the unfortunate setbacks that I've experienced personally and also, I guess, as a team. There's a learning from this, reflecting on them. It's almost that acceptance of, what's best practice at the time and with the information you've got and the timeframes that you've got and all things in front of you, can you reflect and say you would have done things differently? And sometimes there is, but that, the benefit of hindsight is definitely, it's obviously easy to say.
Yeah, 100%. Things move pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You've answered a lot of our questions regarding assistance for future physiotherapists that want to work in pro sport. In terms of bachelor's degree before your first full-time contract. How many years with obviously VFL West Bulldogs? 1 year. Was it East Perth? Were you there before your first
3 years?
3 months?
Yeah.
3 years. 4 years there, semi-pro. Plus some internships.
Yeah, so plus the WACA stuff. So probably since probably 15, 3 years at the two years at the WACA, and a year at the Bulldogs, and then 3 years at East Perth, and then there's a little bit of a stint with the AFL Women's here at Freo as well. So it's probably 7-ish years, I think, all up. Yeah.
Fantastic. Is there anything you would do differently, or what would you say to yourself, I guess, starting out, to prepare yourself, not just to gain a first full-time contract, but also to be able to make that transition, I guess, seamless, because it is a bit of a different jump from semi-pro to full-time, obviously. And
yeah.
Job can prep you, but is there anything you would have done differently?
I guess I reflect on where I'm at, and I feel like I'm getting to where I am. I think I could probably have a fairly good pathway. Now that involved different sports, different clubs. That's probably the one I would say that, and different environments that come with that. So I guess the two different footy clubs that I was at beforehand, it's probably helped. Even, like I said, the Bulldogs was 1 year, but again, for me, that was quite formative, I think. So being in different environments, that means, a whole another set of stakeholders to communicate with and learn how to report to, and even, staff below you to sort of manage and coordinate with different sets of resources and systems and backgrounds and all those kind of things. So, I think it's either that, or you've got to really find ways to kind of challenge yourself to lead in those semi-professional environments. So, that's something that, again, sort of thinking back on it, you can probably find opportunities where, putting yourself out there and trying to be a leader in the environment, in a good sense, in terms of balancing things, not being sort of, dictatorship or anything like that, clearly, but finding ways to drive standards collaboratively when you might feel in those waffle environments or semi-professional environments a little bit isolated in terms of resourcing. That takes a lot of effort, and you're not getting paid for it really, so you've got to take time out of other things to do that. But that, no doubt, those learnings and those skill sets, and even trying some things and they're not quite coming off in a organizational sense, that's still learning and it's still progress. So that's all going to come out and help later on in your career, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's a fine line, isn't it? Like if I reflect on my sort of career, is like you want to learn the way, and when you're with an aligned club, you want to implement what you're seeing during the day in the AFL program to the VFL, so that alignment is key and making sure things are consistent. But I think it's sound advice, and also take risks and take ownership of some decisions yourself, rather than maybe always leaning on others around you. And ultimately that's where you learn the most is through your own, actioning your own thoughts.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, it's good advice, mate. We'll dive into the topic. Maybe a bit of an intro for us. So, why is it a topic that you're passionate about? I guess breaking recurrence injuries. They are the devil when you're in a rehab role. But talk us through, I guess, a bit of an intro to preventing, particularly in soft tissue case recurrences.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I think it's it's just a topic that anyone who works in this field, and even if you're the physio at a state league club, the pain of a soft tissue injury in rehab, or let's just say within the same kind of block of time, even if someone has returned but they have another setback. So that kind of definition of recurrences will kind of keep that loose-ish, I think, to like the same period. But to kind of go in terms of our environment, if something like that happens, so say we've got a hamstring injury and 14 days in, we've got the prescribed session and what we're kind of put towards, and we kind of trying to implement that session as best we can, and we're inevitably in this environment, typically we're going to be trying to push the boundaries a little bit in terms of, in particular, their on-field training. I think it's fair to say that we're not going to get a soft tissue injury outside, touch wood, outside of the on-field training components of what we're doing. So we're always pushing the boundaries there. We value that very highly. So something happens, and personally, okay, you're the one who's been with that athlete every day and seen them and tracked them and lined up this plan to do this session and these skill sets and this type of program, and something happens, and then you've got to walk up to the player and basically own it straight away and say, okay, we're now assessing this again, and we've got to review this, and we've got to go through essentially the process again. And that's like a knife to the heart, to be perfectly honest. That's step one, and then we've got to go and sort of get back in the room with all your colleagues, who will all be feeling the same thing. That it's not a aligned thing. Everyone, the coaching staff, even the other athletes, seeing one of their mates go down again it can really suck the life out of the place, to be honest. So I think you get back in a room, and we might have our 10 to 12, I guess, performance medical staff all sit in a room and really get down to the nitty-gritty about what we think might have happened. And inevitably at times, your program is getting forensically analysed and really looked at. And I think anytime you're in that situation, there's going to be bits you could have done better. Hopefully, which I'm very fortunate to be, I'm in an environment where we're very supportive, and like I said, it's very shared, and everyone's very empathetic of each other about the effort that you put in to really make things work, and we're all on the same team. So there's no pointing fingers, but inevitably you have to have some tough conversations about what you can do better. So I think that whole experience, for me, it's even all sort of cathartic, just sort of talking about it and sort of recognizing how impactful that is on the whole environment. Like I said, it has the capacity to really suck the life out of a club if everyone's dropping the lip around. And if you're in an in-season environment, you can't have too many people that are going to be pulling things down. You've got to try and keep the energy up for everyone. So we as the sort of central practitioners to that are quite important in keeping the energy up and getting back to work, basically. So
yeah, well put, mate. It definitely provides a bit of context in the emotional side of it all, and like you said, everyone feels it in no matter where your role is within the space of high performance sport. When someone does go down with an injury, what do you think is the best thing for the player in that circumstance? So let's say 14 days into their hamstring return to play, and they do their hammy again. Do you think sending them home is the best place to give them space? Is it getting into doing straight into some cross training and working them to from that cultural piece, for the group, that everyone's seeing them, that they're continually to do the work like everyone else is. Like, what's your sort of stance on that when they've just dealt with, I guess, the fact that they're back to square one, or if anything, it's further back from that, it's actually worse.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. I think, look, it's probably depends on the athlete a little bit. I mean, clearly there'll be, and probably stage of the year a little bit as well. Clearly, there'll be some contextual factors there, I think, and for the athlete. But I think if we're, firstly, I think you really need to probably, as a team, as a sort of medical performance team, be able to own it and then reflect on it, and then be able to at least communicate roughly an answer. And that's probably the first part of it would be, okay, this is what we did and this is where we fell down. And sometimes that can be quite simple. Sometimes it's as simple as, we just over-programmed you on this day. We just let the chaos come in a little too much and we weren't quite ready for that. And that's our fault for letting that happen. And it's quite simple in that sense. And I feel like that as if you're an athlete and you've got this team around you that are trying to put together a program, and they're kind of looking around, scratching their head and saying, we're not really sure what quite went wrong there, mate. Sorry. We're going to have a think about it. And there's a bit of doubt around that, about what you're going to do next. That will drive the athlete to be, more insecure about their body potentially and their role to play and what they can do and their control over it. You kind of, they're sort of sitting in the suffering more. So I feel like having that, whether they do kind of depart from the club for a short period because they are so mentally drained, I would hope that there would be a bit of a kind of almost like well, this is what we're going to do next to really arrest this and change this. Or it doesn't have to be we know this will work. It just means this is what we're going to do different. This is where we think we fell down. So if they are going to have a few days off and like, again, that's obviously to unwind and sort of get away from the environment, occasionally important. But other times it might be, they just want to be a part of it, and, removing them, they get their camaraderie by being around the group and those kind of things. So, and hopefully the group's trying to lift them up. So it goes, but, family can do that too, depending on the environment. So I think it's a little bit contextual there, but I would say at least having some potential solutions for the athlete before they kind of take off, and getting that in front of them as soon as possible would be major in terms of setting the framework for what's coming, getting them back in the mindset of getting back to work.
Yeah, 100%. That clarity is so important. What about in circumstances where you find out maybe the athlete wasn't reporting as well as they should have? Obviously, the athlete plays a big part in it all, or maybe their lifestyle you feel like was a factor, and in part of the review process with speaking with the athlete, part of the ownership is actually on them. How do you sort of tackle that situation where obviously we're all part of that, like knowing that information, you can then influence your decision-making on reducing load or progressing the program faster or whatever it might be. But in this case, maybe you didn't know the information that would have been helpful. And then that's shared post-injury. How do you sort of tackle the situation?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Like I said, those big meetings where everyone's in a room, sometimes there is a little bit of pocket of information that comes out that says, yes, the player's been trying to cut a little bit of weight at the same time they've been rehabbed and worried again, so they haven't been having an adequate nutritional intake, or someone reports a life load or a stressor, or, poor sleep or moving house and these kind of things, which, hopefully as the rehabilitation manager, you're kind of across those conversations and there's enough trust to be picked up. But clearly, like I said, sometimes that doesn't happen. So I think, in those sort of situations, usually I think the delivery of, like I said, that, well, this is what we're going to do next. I think there has to be an element of what else can you do in your side of things. Like if we have all sat in the suffering and had the discussion around what else we can push our boundaries in terms of what we might do in terms of, different ways of managing it and different strategies, then inevitably, for the whatever X amount of time that you're not at the club, what are you doing and how are you going to be driving that same sense of empowerment so that we both feel like we're on the same page? And so, sometimes I think those conversations, it depends on the maturity of the athlete and the experience, but they may not realize that, they're, again, you can get to the nitty gritty, but, they're, 30-minute bike ride, the day before a session or those kind of things, and you don't know about, and you're trying to program everything to the nth degree, and they've got a day off before one of their key sessions, and you're just not quite sure. They might have walked, done a really long beach walk, or, these little things here that, okay, we really want to just understand all these things. We're not saying you can't, but just get the athlete really thinking about the 24 hours a day, what they're doing. And sometimes that is, having time to switch off clearly and really disconnect, but doing that in a way that, is helpful for the eventual goal. So again, that's I would say, that next phase of delivery of the next phase of the program. Unfortunately, we've had this situation now. We're going into the next phase. So shared empowerment of it. What are you doing? What are we doing? Cool. Let's shake hands and let's get to work.
Yeah, no, well said, mate. Yeah, because especially if someone's their first time in rehab, they may think that stuff's not relevant and they don't need to share what they do on their off day. But like you said, if it's a long hike or a beach walk, heaps of surfing, whatever it might be, there could be things that maybe they've just picked up that they've never done before. And now you're ramping up their reconditioning during that phase as well. So there's a couple of stresses going on. Well, in your experience, what have been the more common, I guess, factors that lead to or potentially increase the risk of recurrence with soft tissue in the AFL?
So I guess there's obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but there's really big rocks, and then there's the sort of little rocks. And I'd say that probably, I'd certainly hope your listeners, I'm pretty sure your listeners will all be across the big rocks. And so I wanted to kind of probably, I guess, focus attention on some of the other things that might not be the case. But certainly the big rocks, I would say, in rehab are going to be, a misdiagnosis. So inevitably, sometimes the meeting where you're in the room and, we sort of pull up the scans again, and there might be sort of someone that, or the doc or one of the physios might say, well, actually it looks like, and you might even get another report from a separate radiologist or something like that, and you say, oh, there actually is a little bit of a tendon component there. And, that kind of idea. So it's a broad, just a subtle change in terms of the diagnostics, which might, certainly would infer potential, prognosis. So there's been a couple of occasions certainly where that's happened. I think not respecting the early healing is, I guess, if we're talking about in rehab, so again, right at the time, not respecting the early healing is a really big one. So, inevitably the tissue's failed. So that the physiological processes that are going through that system at the time, they're very important to embed down scarring, I guess, if you like, or set the framework for, what's to come in terms of reloading it. So if you're, trying to get things going really quickly, you might just be interrupting that, I guess, cellular process, and that may have consequences down the track. So yeah, then I guess, in rehab, when it comes to programming, there's, the lack of speed control, those sort of things where, let yourself go to let someone run to speed. We know, I guess, not necessarily our cars, but let's say a large portion of our soft tissue injuries are going to have a very high speed component to them. We know that the tissue demands are exponentially greater as we go, further and further into speed brackets. So if we kind of, I guess, want to, let someone, they kind of just tack on a little bit too much speed too quick, we've had issues there clearly, or having too much density of speed as well, hitting, let's say, 75%, 80% max speed, but then, doing that for, let's say, 10 reps or something like that, hypothetically speaking, that's the density of that then becomes a problem. And then, reflecting on some of the other, I guess, setbacks that I've had over my time is, as we're trying to do, more and more, I guess, football-based skill work, and that kind of focus on, let's not lose too much football skills while you're in rehab, handing over, getting some drills together and trying to get drills suitable for multiple athletes, or even getting a coach involved and having a coach take on some components of the skills. And then sometimes those getting a little more chaotic than what we might like. And we've had some setbacks in doing that with the best intentions of getting them as much involved in the football program as possible, but occasionally pushing the boundary a little more there. So I think the I guess they're the in rehab side of things. I think the sort of lessons to be the big rocks, I think, is like, if you get that stuff right, and you can appropriately load, then you're in a safe ballpark. But inevitably, it's impossible to simulate the demands of competition, and that's I think the reality of our situation. You can't simulate someone being, with the crowd in front of them and 90 minutes through a game in a highly competitive environment. Even if you've done those, the GPS metrics for that time and that density and acceleration and deceleration and all those kind of things, it doesn't have the same cognitive demands. So that is, I think, why we are at the highest risk of you could say recurrent injuries, because clearly our sport demands are very high, but then our competition, loading and trying to get someone prepared for that is it's a real challenge. So you need to try and train the chaos. So you need to bring that in at some point, because that's inevitably what's going to happen when they go out and play. And trying to measure that chaos in the lead up to a return to play is a really challenging thing. You can't quite, as I understand it, there's no metric right now that really sort of comes out, although I guess acceleration and decelerations and those kind of things are coming to the party a little bit more, but inevitably that doesn't come with any of the cognitive demands as well of kind of what the athlete's trying to do from a skill perspective. So like, I think they're the big one. They're the common, I guess, factors and the challenges associated to it. So, that's, I guess, just setting the framework for why it's a challenge, I think. Yeah.
What about accelerated sort of return to play compared to conservative? Like, what are so many decision makings around whether you can go down the accelerator route compared to, like you mentioned, tendon involvement, non-tendon involvement? Is it the history of injuries that the players had? Like, talk us through maybe if it's a really important player, the coaching staff pretty eager, it's getting closer to finals or it's in finals and time is of the essence. When do you sort of stay firm on, no, I don't think this is a dice we're willing to roll due to these reasons? Conversely, when you're like, oh no, I think we can here, we're showing good signs, whether it be markers or whatever it might be, where you feel confident to take a faster approach.
Yeah, so I guess it's those conversations are always obviously a big group consultation, and they're definitely thrown up at times. And I think I like the idea of having a really good sort of risk stratification or sort of framework side of things, where you look at some of the external consult, soft tissue experts who might consult on, let's say, problem case soft tissue injuries, and they're very methodical about how they will stratify the type of injury, even though we kind of say, there's a couple of soleuses and there's those kind of things. I think they're really dogmatic about the type of injury, the mechanism, the type of onset, the muscle, the location, the type of tissue, the individual factors, the contextual factors, and pretty much on every one of those kind of headings, then sort of stratifying to be high risk or low risk or sort of somewhere in the middle. And inevitably, that we know there are some athletes that can cope quicker. We'll have a framework, but if someone it's their first soft tissue injury and they've got such a strong chronic loading base behind them, we know that what we've seen on let's say hypothetically day 14, rehab sessions have been able to sort of blow it out the park. And for those guys, we're really confident that, I'm just throwing out the 21-day kind of example, but those guys were really confident about their, return to play capacity, because they don't have much of that contextual factors, and they're highly functional and resilient athletes. So even if things aren't quite perfectly healed, they'll find a way to cope with the demands, at least we hope, versus the others, which might be like we're kind of talking about before, they're just on the yo-yo up and down, and it might not necessarily be the high grade injuries or the sort of tissue type that we'd be concerned about, but they just don't have that chronic base of loading and proof of competition capacity. They just don't have the continuity of it. So that's the biggest rock, I think, in terms of, well, what do we really expect from this? Maybe we can get them back for a session, but then, what's going to happen after that? How are we going to be able to sustain this? And, those conversations can happen inevitably in our environment about, well, we've got so-and-so back coming, next cab in the rank and those kind of things. It sounds a bit brutal, but there's a few more risks that can be taken with certain athletes versus others. As long as it's all kind of above board and agreed to, we're happy to take those times. And certainly there have been times where we've kind of started to understand our copers a little bit more in terms of who might actually go well.
Yeah, it's a fair bit that goes into it. Appreciate it, James, for going into that level of detail. What about communication, mate? You've mentioned a few times, obviously, the collaboration. Clearly, it's an important piece, the meetings that you have in decision-making and planning and programming. But what about, with yourself and the coaches? Are you in direct communication with them, or is it more high-performance manager? Equally with the players, do you update players on a weekly basis, the whole group, on how the rehab list are going, or how they communicate? Is that more informal, perhaps, for those that are interested? Sort of, you chat to them one-on-one. Yeah, talk us through that.
There's so I think I'll defer a lot of our kind of discussions about the I guess not say availability, but the current status of our athletes will be sort of filtered through Phil Merriman, our high performance manager, who is a great leader in the way that he will, I guess, he puts a lot of trust in his staff, and sort of really appreciate that. So he will kind of, I guess, gather the information and deliver that ultimately to our coaching staff. That's our kind of system, I guess, in a broad sense, a reporting sense. Inevitably, I'll often have conversations, usually, let's say, with a medium-term injured athlete with their line coach about the sort of ways that we can, keep the athlete empowered to be working on their craft or their potential holes or areas that they can, attack a little bit more. I think having the coaches understand even just like the anatomy of it and kind of the situation and the potential challenges and what you're working on, having them, as an advocate to your program from a coaching sense is really empowering for the athlete to feel like, yep, everyone's aligned and we all get it, we're all on the same page. So there'll definitely be conversations with the line coach. In terms of reporting to the group, there's a couple of little periods, and we certainly probably, as much as anything, a bit more when things are going well or there might be a big return and those kind of things. We'll definitely celebrate those successes in front of the whole group. The players will actually drive a lot of that as well, which is fantastic. Our leadership group are great in terms of, everyone understands it can be a bit isolating in rehab, so they'll kind of, pump it up with their player meetings on occasions as well. And also sometimes the other way, if that's giving a little bit of a carrot, but sometimes they might be a little bit of a stick as well, since it's going the other way. They're not quite getting, doing the work as much as they could be. The leaders are really good in terms of even stick versus carrot. So
yeah, fantastic, awesome, mate. Well, I'm aware that it's nearly getting to an hour, so mindful of your time. But is there anything on this topic that you'd like to share before we dive into the last sort of wrap up questions?
Yeah, I think probably the lessons learned, and this is, probably only a recent thing, but I guess the way I'd like to sort of think about some of these things often is, if you're having a recurrent issue, and like I said, that can be, on a couple of issues in the same year, not necessarily back to back to back to back, but you can't get that consistency, as we know that's going to be one of the major things. I guess I've been fortunate to consult with some external consultants with the athlete after there's been a few problematic issues, and then kind of see how they might be framing up the type of the type of management. And we talk about mentors and sort of influences on careers and those kind of things. Enda King is clearly a very popular figure in this space, and an amazing clinician, but without a doubt, an absolutely amazing motivator and amazing coach. Again, coming from a physio side of things, that's not one of our strengths, I would say. We've got the medical sort of framework and medical understandings. And for me personally, in this role, which can be either an S&C or a physio, it could be sort of either or, that's something for me always trying to grow in, is my ability to coach an athlete. And those sort of things doesn't it's not as natural as other parts of the program. The empathy and the care, I think that comes from a physio lens quite easily. But have been fortunate to, I guess, travel to Aspetar a couple of times. Once with one of our athletes in particular that we've sort of spent a lot of time with already, and you feel like you've got a really good understanding of most of the parts of the program, and really just parking everything when it comes to their system and the system they're in, the program they're in, and just really taking them on an individual level and blank slate, assessing them start to finish. And a lot of those ideas that kind of come out of that, the idea of having a leaky bucket. And most of our athletes in our environment, and even semi-professional environments, are going to be typically, we talk about big rocks or small rocks, but they're going to be strong usually if they've got a good healthy program. We kind of broadly understand what a good healthy program is in terms of I guess soft tissue mitigation risk with good chronic loads and good speeds and good strength. So if they're doing all of that, but then we're having a problem hypothetically in a certain area, then what is about that program that's not fitting? And that's where the idea of having a leaky bucket. So you've got all this energy, you've got all this kind of capacity to generate force, and all our measurements, broadly speaking, tick, 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 if we're kind of on an isolated level. I think if you're having recurrent issues, what I'd say is that, there's some sort of kink in the armor somewhere. And there'll be some, our brains, as we have recurrent issues, are good at finding the path of least resistance. I think there's plenty of evidence around that in terms of our body will move in a way that will, defer away from an area which might have a problem. And I think that can happen on an individual muscle level, potentially in terms of recruitment patterns, or even, the balance of medial natural and different sort of heads of soft tissues and those kind of things, which then might mean that even though on paper we look like we've got, we're generating good force and we've got a good program, we've got good exercises, maybe there is something on a more, I guess you could say, lighter level where we really need to get this really specific area loaded. And that's been some of the learnings I've had in terms of being like a dog in a bone, and that's how Enda is as a coach, in ensuring that you are getting exactly what you want out of an exercise. And it doesn't matter what the exercise is or how it looks or what's happening, but you're literally spending an hour trying to find something that will hit the right spot that you value and you want to kind of recruit. So you're usually pulling away intensity with that. You're usually pulling away speed mostly, and you're kind of trying to find a way to sort of saturate effort from a neurological perspective to a certain area. And I think when we talk about those things of like, okay, we've had a problem, how are we going to present that back to the room? At the very least, what you're doing, if you're spending that much time being really, just diligent about making sure that you're hitting the right areas, then at the very least, you're going to be empowering the athlete to really understand how to, recruit a potential flaw in their system. It might be a big, broad, way of moving, or it could be just a really focal tissue contraction, which, I don't, like the idea of banding away sort of activation and what that actually means in terms of really good tissue physiology, other than to say in the situations that you've had recurrent issues, getting really ensuring that you're hitting the right areas is really important there. So, I think, and like I said, the big thing there is that the athlete hopefully can feel more in control, and they're the ones eventually who are buying into those sort of things, and they are now, leading that area in terms of doing it themselves. They really understand good movement, and they really understand how to recruit, a certain area well. So that's empowering for them. And if they need help along the way, sort of from that, then we can change it. So, that's probably the big one. I think that it's been sort of, I think my lesson, the side of things in terms of we're really lucky that we do have a lot of support in terms of our systems, in terms of those holistic factors as well. So, I can definitely think of examples where there's been some setbacks there, but deferring to the experts when it comes to that area as well. As rehab manager, you have a role to play in facilitating the athlete to recognize the importance of it. And you might be able to touch on a few elements and really dive into the nitty-gritty of why that's important, but inevitably, there's going to be experts in terms of how to assist with recovery, assist with sleep, assist with their mental well-being or their sense of recovery and preparedness to train and those kind of things as well. So finding support, finding experts around, even external consultations to have like other players look, other staff who are senior look at them as well and really break it down. Like the idea of seeing an athlete as if they're walking into the clinic and they've had problems, and it's almost removing them from the system and environment and the repetitive nature of where they're training to really isolate them a little bit more and give them some different things to work on. So
yeah, fantastic. That's awesome, mate. Thanks, James, for sharing such an intro. It's a complex role. On the daily, you're dealing with many decisions and solving problems. But I think to give insight to practitioners that may have not experienced rehab before, clearly it's a role that you develop a lot as a practitioner, both from a holistic point of view, but also skill set. Like you said, whether you're the physiotherapist that's leading the program, you're developing your S&C knowledge and coaching ability, or vice versa. If you're an S&C, you're more medical and understanding of pathology. So highly recommend it. No doubt those that have listened are pretty engaged in the role, and no doubt you've inspired them to want to tackle the challenge of rehab manager, or whether it be at community level, semi-pro, or at the top level. So I really appreciate you coming on, mate, and sharing with us your journey. Pet peeves, anything that fires you up from an industry perspective?
It's probably, look, I think there's a couple of things, listen to Daniel Cross is obviously in a similar role. He mentioned the low motivated athletes and the whole idea of having, someone who's getting paid a relatively large sum to be able to, work hard and train and, just go out and kick the footy and those kind of things. And if you've got someone who's low motivation, I understand the toll that it can have on an athlete. And I am empathetic towards all that understanding, but at the end of the day, keep your motivation high in different areas. And, so that's definitely a pet peeve. I'd say over here in the West, pet peeve of mine is, we've got a pretty, I guess you'd say, insular sort of media landscape. And, certainly there's a lot of attention on any problem. It's a real sort of beat up that we have over our end of Australia. I'm sure it is sort of everywhere as well. But, there's some real, lack of care when it comes to kind of the whole idea of what someone might be going through, and just lack of perspective on kind of, efforts that have been made and those kind of things, I think. So definitely a pet peeve with our industry is the media attention on, you could say recurrences, but just injuries in general and performance and those kind of things. But that's the landscape we're in. There's, it sells papers and clicks and those kind of things. And the other one is probably just illness. You can have this kind of idea of talking about chronic loads and trying to sustain things. And, we always find in the middle of the year, a bit of illness can just sort of rock things around. And if you're having a recurrence and you're getting back in the room and you're sitting there and you've got a period of illness, what does that actually do physiologically to the body in terms of recovery and where they're at and their capacity to return? So that's a pet peeve where it's sort of like, all this attention on everything, but what's the system like? Is the player healthy? And if the player wasn't healthy at the time and you're trying to sort of bite off a little bit more, I mean, that's a real pet peeve is, can you really sacrifice a session because they're ill? Yes, of course you can, but you're trying to develop the perfect plan. You've only got X number of sessions to return someone. So it's a real kind of just, if we can have hopefully our players, on top of their illness, that'd be good.
Yep. Yeah. There's so many factors that go into it. That's a good one. Favorite way to spend a day off, mate?
Look, waking up with the family, and the kids. I've got 2 girls jumping on me, another one coming soon. So waking up with the family, having a bit of fun. Yep. And then I had my birthday the other day, and it was a day off, and I dropped the kids at school and everything, and then I thought, I'm going to get on the bike and go a lap around the river and stop off at Cottesloe, have a dip, get a nice long macchiato, go out for a nice meal with my wife, and then a good sleep. So that'd be the ideal day. And that's what I just had the other day, which is great.
Nice, recharge the batteries. That's awesome, mate.
Yeah.
And what about, obviously, with the point of this recordings, close to October of 2024 is done. So we're at the pointy end of what are you excited about for the rest of the year, but also transitioning to 2025, mate? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I guess certainly I mentioned at the start, but here at Freo, we're on the cusp of something big. That's how I feel, and I'm sure everyone in the club feels that way. We got to get to work. There's no guarantees at all about that, but certainly the I guess potential of our list and our environment and our team is really, really exciting to see where we can get to. So that's a massive, I guess, professional goal in terms of growth, in terms of improvement. But I think individually, I've had 5 years nearly at the club now. So for me, it's trying to find ways to grow in terms of my capacity to lead in different areas, and I guess the nitty gritty of the rehab and those kind of things. It's always going to be growth areas and learning and all those kind of things. But for me, it's about trying to become like I said, a better leader in the environment, help drive standards further, and that's always going to be a goal. So that's something I'm going to be working on for the next little period.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's awesome, mate. Thanks for sharing. And for those that have any follow-up questions, James, is there a best place to get in contact?
Probably, I don't have too many sort of socials, but I'd say probably LinkedIn would be the way if anyone wants to reach out. Always happy to have a coffee and a chat with anyone about anything. It's a complex world out there, and the more support we can have around each other, the better. So yeah, LinkedIn would be the way to go.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Well, for those listening in, we'll add James's LinkedIn handle in the show notes. So if you listen to the recording, you can find it in there. If you've jumped in and watched our live halfway through or at the end here, you can find the recording on our YouTube channel before we release it on our podcast. And I haven't penciled in our next guest, so leave it with me. You'll no doubt see it on either our email list if you subscribe there, or on our Instagram socials or on the YouTube channel itself. So stay tuned, but thanks for everyone that's tuned in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.